Welcome to the Diabetes Podcast, where we rewrite the story of diabetes. If you're ready to break free from the guilt, the medication, and the fear of complications, you're in the right place. Each episode is packed with real talk, proven strategies, and inspiring wins from people just like you. Yes, remission from type 2 and prediabetes is real, and it starts right now. Let's get into it. Hello, I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And another good day, a really good day, because it just so happens that as we are recording this particular podcast, it is Mother's Day. And I'm sure that we have a ton of really excellent mothers listening to this podcast, but I'm going to clue you guys in. We have a particularly excellent mother producing this podcast. I would just like to say thank you so much, Amber, for being a great mom, not just to our kids, but to this podcast. You've given birth to a pretty cool opportunity to reach a lot of people that need some help. And I'm just so honored and blessed to be with you on this journey to really change the conversation around how we treat type 2 and prediabetes.
Yes, I feel exceptionally blessed by our 3 children, and also to have this opportunity to help people and have a platform to reach people. It's really a blessing.
Indeed it is. Now, on to the good stuff.
It's all good stuff.
It is all good stuff. Today, we're talking about increased hepatic glucose production. So hepatic, just with my limited amount of anatomy knowledge, we're talking about glucose production in your liver.
Yes.
And then just kind of a recap, this is now part 5 of our 12-part series in which we're talking about basically all of the 12 mechanisms that are really actively attacking your body as diabetes kind of comes into its own, and what you can do to combat that.
Yep.
So
the 12 core defects that are taking place that lead to impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, all of that progression there.
All right. So Amber, Tell us about increased hepatic glucose production.
Well, what do you want to know?
Well, okay. So normally our liver can produce and release glucose. So maybe we start there. Tell us about how this process works in a normally, or let's just call it healthy or non-disease state.
So your liver plays a very important role in making sure you have the glucose that you need in any given moment. Mm-hmm. And if you are suddenly chased by a lion, you need this incredible amount of energy to be able to run away, and your fight or flight hormones come into play and signal the liver to release glucose so that you can get away from that thing attacking you. But the main thing that the liver also does is fuel and maintain a constant supply of glucose for your brain, because your brain really, really likes to have glucose for energy. And so when you're in the fasted state while you're sleeping, the liver makes sure that your body has that glucose availability to power your brain.
So if I understand correctly, we know that every time I eat, that particularly if I have carbs with what I eat, that there's going to be an increase in the sugar in my bloodstream. The liver's really acting more as kind of like a slow drip normally, right? Just making sure that those big spikes aren't the only available, like my brain's not going to only function around eating time and then I get to go sleep for a couple hours. This is allowing me to kind of smooth out those peaks and those troughs and keep me on the slow drip of brain fuel, basically.
I think a good analogy is if you need gas for your vehicle, you go to the gas station and you fill it up. but you still need that gas tank and you need your fuel injector. You need that constant supply in there. And when you refeed, that's like putting the nozzle in the gas tank and filling up the fuel. But this makes sure that the fuel supply is constant.
Okay.
And it does this in two different ways. Here come the big words.
All right. I got my pen and paper handy.
Okay. You have glycogenolysis, which is using that stored glucose that is in the liver for energy, and stored glucose is called glycogen. So it's breaking down that glycogen to be used. And then there's also gluconeogenesis. So gluco, sugar, neo for new, and genesis is the beginning. So you're making new glucose from some other non-carbohydrate fuel sources sometimes.
So this would be like, say, for example, I'm on like a keto diet or something like that. It's not.
You're always going to the keto diet. Like you're finding, I think you're finding a way to get there.
I'm just trying to frame this in a context that some folks might understand.
Okay.
Right. My liver has the capacity to make glucose, even in the absence of complex carbohydrates, which is why I can do a diet that is largely absent of, or the carbohydrate availability is low from a new stuff going into my mouth.
Yeah, right? Your liver is working harder.
I can do it, but not ideal, obviously. But again, this is why that works.
It's not the most efficient way to get glucose.
It does have that capacity.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Still not sure why you brought it in, but that's okay.
All right.
It's fine. Are you going to ask me what goes wrong?
I could.
Okay. Well, in type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, there's a problem with the signaling because these cells are resistant to insulin. And normally, insulin is released by the beta cells of the pancreas. I mean, it's always released by the beta cells of the pancreas. But when insulin is in play, the liver knows to shut down and not put out more glucose, or it doesn't really need to produce any glucose, because if the insulin's in your system, typically that's because you have consumed a meal. And so the fact that you are actively taking sugar and carbs in from that meal means that insulin is being released in response to that meal to get the sugar into the cells so that energy can be made. So insulin tells the liver to stop it. It tells it stop making new glucose, stop the gluconeogenesis, stop the glycogenolysis. And the problem with resistance is that insulin is at high circulating levels, but the body is resistant to it. So it's not really able to put the brakes on the liver.
Something that's kind of occurring to me now after hearing this kind of over and over again, it kind of sounds like diabetes is like this big communication error. Like
that's a great overall simplified summary.
A bunch of different mechanisms going on inside my body, but it's like it's like several telephone games going on at the same time. The signal's going out, but it's increasingly either not being received or being incorrectly perceived or something like that. There's just a lot of miscommunication going on at a cellular, at a tissue system level, just a bunch of crosstalk and not a lot of really effective communication.
Yeah, that's a good summary. And in insulin resistance, that off switch to the communication for the liver to shut down production is broken. And it's so common. This is probably, of everything that I hear from people who have diabetes, this is one of the most common things that they say, which is, I don't understand it. Like, just completely flabbergasted, not understanding how it is true that they can go to bed with a blood sugar 80, 90, 100 and wake up and that blood sugar is 180, 190. Like, it just boggles the mind. How can that be true? And my answer is always because you have a liver. And
The
people
liver
are like,
did it.
the liver did it. And and people are just like, you didn't really answer my question, but I did, but I didn't, So yeah, you have a liver and it's trying to regulate all of these things. And another big problem is glucagon, and it's not often talked about, but glucagon is the antagonist to insulin, or it works counter to insulin. So insulin tells the liver to stop glucose production, and glucagon tells it to put out this glucose
so
into
one's
the
a turn on
bloodstream.
production, the other one's a shut down production. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So you've got this hormonal surge that can happen, and the glucagon is there as well. The off switch isn't working, and to your point, a lot of different things are going on that is not letting the liver stop putting out glucose. And the cells can't take it in, and it's also called dawn phenomenon. When this happens, dawn phenomenon is more related to the hormonal side of this than insulin resistance, but both things, it's whatever would cause the glucose to rise overnight due to hormones.
Okay. So why is this dangerous?
Well, it's a third of the processes that can cause high blood sugar. So DeFranzo talked about that triumvirate, and one is decreased glucose uptake by the muscle cells.
Okay, so we did talk about that. So that's...
Yep, we talked about that, where 70 to 80% of glucose can be taken in by the skeletal muscle. And what we haven't talked about is impaired insulin secretion.
Okay.
So the pancreas aren't able to put out as much insulin sometimes. Most of the time in type 2, people who have type 2 diabetes, they actually are putting out more insulin than you and I, but sometimes it's impaired. And then what the topic of this is, which is the increased hepatic glucose production.
Okay.
And that directly leads to elevated glucose in the bloodstream.
Okay.
And then we talked about glucagon again, but just to go back to that, glucagon is produced by the alpha cells of the pancreas. So I think so much attention is spent on beta cells because they produce insulin, and less on the alpha cells.
So you've mentioned beta cells before, and I think we'll probably do a deep dive on that at some point in time. This is the first I've heard about those alpha cells. So can you go a little bit more into what the alpha cells are and what they do and that kind of stuff?
Well, the alpha cells produce glucagon in the pancreas, and glucagon, again, is there for that fight or flight response. It's also there to keep your brain fed.
Okay.
It's there if somebody has a low blood sugar reaction. Glucagon has a very important role in helping keep the blood sugar normalized to, 70, 80, and not let it go below that.
So the alpha cells and the beta cells are in the pancreas.
Yes.
Okay.
Produced in the pancreas. Yep.
So what medications are used to treat the hepatic, or at least regulate the hepatic glucose production?
Yeah. So when we look at medications to stop the liver from being a little wonky, you have the biguanides, which the more recognized of that would be glucophage or metformin.
Which we've talked about.
Yes, we have. And it works the way that metformin works among, much of the mechanism of action. The most prominent has to do with the liver, is that it suppresses the glucose production by lowering the cyclic AMP levels. So go back to the Krebs cycle inside the liver cells, and it really blunts that effect of glucagon that's trying to put out sugar.
This is a braking or a slowing effect for that glucagon. Okay.
And the other is the ever popular glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, which would be your semaglutide, your tirzepatide, Ozempic,
which we've also talked about.
Yes, we have. And they work actually on 6 of the ominous octet, which came before we moved along to the 12 core defects. But not that we came up with this, and let me be clear, this is not my work or my research. This is very much Ralph DeFranzo and many others that worked in this field. But the main role in the liver is that it suppresses this glucose production in a different way than metformin. It works on those pancreatic alpha cells and gets them to produce, so there's less stimulation of the liver to produce and release glucose by affecting that glucagon release.
So these GLP-1s, they're really like almost going to the source then, kind of reducing that glucagon before it even gets produced.
That's a great summary there. Then you have your thiazolidinediones, which would be actose. We talked about this.
Also talked about,
yes, the last podcast. And the reason being that they activate those PPAR gamma receptors. And that, remember, those are the receptors that turn on genes that improve insulin sensitivity and glucose uptake at the cellular level. And they shift fat storage from storing in the liver to subcutaneous fat, which is the fat right underneath the skin, and it really helps reduce the lipotoxicity that we talked about last time.
I'm assuming just that movement of fat or redistribution of fat from the liver just helps the liver function better. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like repackaging stuff. It's like organizing. Yeah.
Okay.
Then you have your dipeptidyl peptide 4
oh my goodness
inhibitors. Say that 5 times fast. Dipeptidyl peptide.
It's a slight divergence.
DPP4 inhibitors.
Who's coming up with these names? Like, I mean, really?
Well, I mean, that's anatomy. That is an enzyme that works in the gut, and and so this medicine inhibits that enzyme because that enzyme breaks down the GLP and the GIP in the gut. And so if you inhibit the enzyme, you decrease how quickly the GLP-1 breaks down. But so you would not be on a GLP-1 and a DPP-4 inhibitor at the same time because they work on like different ends of the pathway.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've talked about this class of drugs before.
We have not.
Right. So which drugs that maybe our listeners might recognize would be in this class of drugs?
I think most people who would be on this class of drugs would be on a drug called Januvia. But if you're on a drug ending in gliptin, saxagliptin, linagliptin, things like that, then that's the DPP-4 inhibitors. And they're really safe. They're often used, especially in elderly adults, because of their safety profile. Definitely inferior to the GLP-1 receptor agonists and the TZDs.
Why is that?
Well, just because I said so, Richie. That's why. No. They just don't work well across time.
Okay.
After you've been on them for, well, I mean, the A1C reduction first and foremost is like 0.4, maybe 0.7, 0.8, and then across time, they just don't stand the test of time. No, and furthermore, they don't work on the core defect. Like, they don't help to improve anything. Like, they don't fix anything, really.
So it's making it less worse, but not making it better. Is that?
That's a decent, decent summary of that.
Okay. All right. So since we got a whole bunch of drugs that are kind of sort of having this secondary effect of kind of regulating hepatic glucose production, can you just real quick kind of give us a recap of the downsides of these classes?
Yeah, your metformin, the biguanides, a big downside of that would be diarrhea, and and just like some people just can't tolerate it due to gas and bloating and things like that. Then the GLP-1 class, that would be nausea and vomiting, mostly due to that decreased gut motility where it feels like food's just sitting there and they, and then your TZDs, we talked last time about congestive heart failure because of the added fluid and weight. And it's really just because it increases blood volume and weight. DeFranzo is one person that would definitely say it does not increase heart failure. And And that's kind of counterintuitive, because if you think if there's more fluid, and then it's making things worse, it's causing weight gain, it's making things worse. But really,
it sounds to me like more fluid equates to more blood pressure. Is that not accurate? Or
it's not.
Okay.
Not with this class. And it does increase blood volume, but not in a bad way. And it really does help sensitize the liver, and it helps sensitize it to and take in more insulin. So in that way, and it can also help with fatty liver. It can help keep the liver from storing fat there, like we were saying, and move it further out to the subcutaneous tissue. So fatty liver and diabetes are ugly cousins, and so that helps there. And then we talked about and then also the increased bone degeneration, especially with females. That's more of a long-term. If you've been on TZDs 10 plus years, you're going to really start to see that. So the idea is that you're on this medicine. It's helpful. It halts progression while you create new habits and you do other things, that you're not on this for a lifetime.
Okay.
And then just to recap with the DPP-4 inhibitors, we talked about how they don't really have many side effects, but they don't slow disease progression
They're just
either.
not very effective. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this is normally the time in the show which we talk about
anything
meds can do, you can do better. What behaviors decrease hepatic glucose production? Overproduction, I guess I should say.
What behaviors decrease? Well, I think it's more, I mean, yes, you could say it that way. I like to say what behaviors decrease insulin resistance and increase skeletal glucose uptake, especially because that's 70 to 80% of all of your glucose uptake, especially post-meal, which can do some of the most harm, is high blood sugars after the meal. And guess what I'm going to say?
Diet and exercise?
Yes. Diet and exercise, but more specifically.
Okay. Tell what specific dietary changes and what exercise or movement behaviors are most helpful as it relates to the liver?
Yes. First, I want to say anything is helpful. We covered that last podcast. You do 2 minutes of walking, you're going to help that postprandial,
better than nothing.
Post-meal response. Yes. But more specifically for this, moderate intensity exercise is going to improve the insulin signaling.
Can you define moderate intensity exercise?
You can.
Well, I'm asking. I know what my definition is.
What's your definition?
My definition of moderate intensity exercise would be like zone 2, really like zone 3, as it relates to your heart rate.
And what if people don't know zone 2, zone 3?
I mean, we're talking like around 70 percentile is what I would say. I can still hold a conversation, but my skin's probably getting warm after about 10 minutes of the activity. I'm probably perspiring a little bit. If I'm not, then either it's real cold or I'm not at that 70%, but not so much that I like to I guess measure that I have is when I can't breathe through my nose anymore comfortably, and I got to start opening up the mouth to start gasping for air. That's a pretty good indication that I'm getting outside of that aerobic exercise. So a moderate intensity would still be in the aerobic, not breaking into the anaerobic category.
Exactly. And if you need more assistance with that, I'm sure if you know any exercise physiologist, any physical therapist, you can, hey, Google. Yeah. You can find what moderate intensity exercise would look like. So, that's going to also look different for different people, and your level of fitness is going to adjust what's moderate for you. So this is really kind of what it's a whole other podcast.
It is a whole other podcast. This is when we're working with individuals on a one-on-one basis, after I've established my walking habit, for lack of a better description. Again, really that walking is always the gateway exercise drug to more advanced stuff.
Gateway exercise, non-drug.
But to that point, I'm not going to have you doing higher intensity stuff if you have not just mastered like, look, you're going to have to get out there and move after your meals. Like this is in addition to, not replacing that.
Yep. You need to walk before you can run,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that could be helpful would be more consistent carbohydrate intake throughout your day. So instead of one large meal in a day, having meal and a little snack and a meal and a little snack. And it's been interesting for me throughout decades of working as a dietitian and diabetes educator, how differently people define what a meal is and what a snack is. And it's really just about getting nutrition in your body and refining that across time. Wherever you are, start there and tweak it one thing at a time to improve it.
Is there kind of this is probably getting too much into the weeds.
You're good at that. Let's go.
Yeah. So when we talk about consistent carbohydrate intake, we're talking about spreading it out across the day. This sounds to me like smaller meals. Is there a amount of carbs? And again, I know this varies by person.
You're getting really prescriptive.
But is there
it's okay.
an amount of carbs to try and kind of cap it to in one sitting?
Yeah. Again, there is just as exercise is going to be tailored to where you are and tailored to your needs for exercise. The same thing with nutrition. And I say that your diet is what you eat. That is your diet. And it's going to vary based on your caloric output, how much energy you burn at rest, how much energy you burn doing activity. If I had to be, are you twisting my arm, sir?
I'm aggressively twisting your arm.
If someone was aggressively twisting my arm, and
Which
apparently you are,
yes.
I would say you could do something like 30 grams at breakfast, or even 15 because of such a strong hormonal response in the morning. And then just kind of alternate 30, 15, 30, 15.
Okay.
And some people, of course, would need much more. And it just depends. It depends on how many times a day you eat that. Too.
The only reason I even asked the question in the first place is that it at least prompts you to start being aware of how the volume of carbs that are in a snack, in a meal,
and what is a carb, and a lot of people struggle with that. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are apps to help with that. MyFitnessPal, Lose It.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Lose It, have been for years, and I use Lose It. I'm not sponsored by Lose It, but again, it's a good product.
Anyway, another podcast. And of course, the goal of the moderate intensity exercise and consistent carbohydrate intake would be to help lose visceral fat, because the more fat you store in and around your midsection and your internal organs, the more it's going to interfere with all of the hormone signaling. Fat is a very metabolically active hormone, especially visceral fat. Okay. And so even just a very small amount of reduction there can exponentially help. And then so we talked about hormones getting in the way with dawn phenomenon and such, and one of those hormones is cortisol. And so making sure you get good sleep and manage your stress, all of these things are going to help improve insulin resistance.
Okay.
And then in terms of being more specific, other than just consistent carbohydrate intake, you could increase your soluble fiber. So that's the fiber that your gut can actually digest and break down.
And I think this was associated, the increase in soluble fiber, if I believe right.
Let's see how you do.
I think it's associated with a reduction in visceral fat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah. And many other things as well. Heart disease, it plays a role in reducing heart disease risk, and diverticulitis, diverticulosis. It can improve gut motility, all of those things. Yeah. And limiting refined carbs, or your simple ultra processed carbs, and then limiting saturated fat.
All right.
So less than 10% of your calories from saturated fat.
All right. Well, that was, once again, a lot. But to me, kind of takeaway, or at least what I got, is I'm starting to get a better picture of like how all this stuff happening simultaneously. It's hard to point to a thing. It's hard to just, not to have a terrible amount of compassion for pharmaceutical companies, but it's hard to design a drug that just, does this one thing.
Absolutely.
But when there's all of these things happening simultaneously, and then I've got complications with this drug and that, like it's a tough. This is a tough disease to crack medically, which I think is why it's not being effectively treated medically.
Yeah, but I want to speak to that too.
Pharmaceutically, from a drug standpoint.
From a drug standpoint, like looking at the SGLT2s as an example, SGLT1 is even a stronger mechanism in the kidney, but the problem is SGLT1 is everywhere.
Right.
It's systemic. It's all over the place.
So I can't treat your kidneys without treating everything.
Exactly. And then it has negative effects. Like the TZDs, we talked about how amazing it is that it works on that PPAR gamma receptor. But the problem is that PPAR gamma receptor is also in bone tissue. Well, and so skeletal tissue. And because it can make the bone tissue turn more fatty,
right,
that is a problem.
Yeah.
We have all the benefits, but then you have
unintended side effects.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas the SGLT2s are very, very specific to the kidneys. And that's why that drug class works very, very well with what it does there.
Okay. All right. Well, so next time we're going to be talking about impaired insulin secretion, which I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I know we've been talking about my body's resistant to insulin, so my body produces too much insulin. This sounds like I can only produce too much insulin for a while until I start, like, if I had to guess, this sounds to me like later complications of type 2 specifically, diabetes, where the production facility is starting to break down. Is that
you're almost there?
Okay.
I'm very proud.
I'll wait for the synopsis for next week.
Are you sure? Because what I want to say to that though is that it starts way sooner than you think.
Okay.
Like you might be completely out of beta cell production late in the game, but it starts very, very early in the game.
Wow. Okay.
Before you even know you're in the game, let's say.
Well, until next week, I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And we will talk to you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to the Diabetes Podcast, where diabetes doesn't define your future. If you liked what you heard, please share this episode and leave a review. If you want to hear more, please subscribe to hear the latest episodes. And if you're ready to take the next step towards freedom and energy, head to empowerdiabetes.com to learn how we support real change with real results. Your healthiest chapter starts now. Take courage. You can do this, and we can help.